Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation. Just want to take a moment to wish you a blessed day before we get started. So, the topic I have to discuss with you today is going to be one that many leave behind in the realm of myth and legend and hoax. But I want to show you a different perspective, and I'm going to do that utilizing two separate photographs and a little bit of footage that I've been holding on to for several years now, and we're really going to go over it with a fine-tooth comb with different filters, and then I'm going to show you where these pictures were taken, and I'm going to compare myself to each of the anomalies we're going to inspect. Okay, so moving into this next part of the presentation, I'm going to start off with this first photograph, which I'll explain the setup of in just a moment. First, I'm just going to give you a basic rundown of how this photo was taken and the whole setup going on with it. So to start off here, you have this area here on this right hand side of the frame, and this is actually the north corner of our property, of this yard. And what you have basically going on here is you have a clearing right here. Okay, so if this is the shape of the property right here, it's basically a cutout in this forested area. And so we're looking at this north corner right here right now from an angle. Okay, so like a fire pit right over here. Okay. On this side, we have a hill that goes down like this, and there's a little creek right at the bottom of this hill, and that creek snakes up the mountain, splits off in different directions, and goes all the way to the top of the timberline, which is way the heck up here. Okay, and this whole area is what you call an exclusion zone. So what that means is that you can only develop as a landowner up to a certain point, which would be like right where the edge of this yard would be. And then the lumber companies can't harvest in here. So for all intents and purposes, it is a natural preserve. All right, that's what you're looking at in this scene. So these trees here are new growth, relatively new growth, from the logging that took place from the mid 1800s to the early 1900s. All right. So this is all grown back up in the last 50 to 60 years. Okay, and it's now completely preserved. And there's a big cutout of it, of this section up here at the top of this ridge that is a preserve as well. Okay, so that's what's going on here in this photo, where this location is. Okay, so to preface the photo itself, first thing you need to know is that it was actually taken with an old iPhone 6. Okay, so that's why it looks like this, and it had a bit of a zoom modifier on that phone. Okay, because when I first came across this structure here, over here, I was a little bit it was a little bit off-putting. Okay, and I'll get into exactly how I ran into this. So I was sitting out at this fire pit over here one evening, and this was taken in November 2019. Okay, and I was sitting out here at this fire pit, just catching up with my sister one evening, and for whatever reason I was drawn to looking over to this side of the yard, And over there, for just a brief moment, I saw what looked like a large pair of eyes peeking out from behind a tree. Okay. Now, rationally, I'm thinking, well, it could be a bear, could be an owl, or an enormous raccoon. We do have elk out here, so, I was just going over the logical potentials, and that evening I just kind of dismissed it because it was very brief. But it was bothering me, so I went back out to the same area of the yard the next morning, and I noticed that there was a branch out from one of those redwoods where I'd seen the eyes looking, and it had been snapped. And I inspected that branch, and it was still white and green on the inside. So what that tells you is that it's reasonably fresh. So I'm thinking, well, maybe it happened last night, and it kind of got me a little more curious. So I was poking around, and down here, there's like a little cluster of redwood trees on this side of the yard, and I found a little trail that goes, skirts back around those, and it joins up with a primary game trail that follows this creek up the mountain, and all kinds of things use that. So I was just kind of in exploratory mode and followed that up a little ways, and that's when I ran into this. Okay. Now, this isn't a very good picture of this structure, but I'm going to show you a much better one coming up where you can see this directly on, all right? So you can really get a good look at it and pick it apart. For those of you who don't know, these structures like this are often associated with the Sasquatch phenomenon, all right, which is what we're going to be touching on today. Okay, so when I first saw this, I was a little bit, I was a little bit off put by it, a little cautious, and really, I had a lot of little alarm bells going off in my brain telling me that this could potentially be a dangerous situation to be walking into, potentially. So that's just what my instincts were telling me at that time, which is why I zoomed in on this from a distance the way I did for that first shot, because I was a little hesitant to get closer at first. But later on, when I went to review these, and I pulled these up actually years after I took them because I wasn't even aware of what was in them. But about a month ago, I pulled them back up because I was going to email into another channel here on YouTube, The Facts by howtohunt.com. I was going to email them in a couple of my experiences, and I was going to send this photo here. But before I did that, I really decided to sit down and look at the background of these photos to see what was going on in them. Because sometimes people do spot things in the background of their photos. So I went over it with a fine-tooth comb, and it turns out that there are actually anomalies in this one. And there's also anomalies in the next photo I'm going to get to. So I'll just start off in this particular photo by pointing out these two anomalies right here and right here. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about today, starting with these. And just to zoom in briefly before moving on here, we just zoom in, we can see already that whatever's going on with these shapes back here, it's not uniform with all the other objects back here in this scene. Now, what's important to take note of before we actually move too much further is going to be the angle of this shot. So right here in front of this shot, there is a rather large redwood stump that's sitting here. And we're going to get into later this log over here and where this actually is situated in the next shot. But basically, we are looking past this stump a little ways, and there's a bunch of stuff back here that I'm going to show you in person later, but just bear in mind there's a stump there, all right? That's what that is. Okay, but getting into this, again, you can see there's not much you can go based off of. So I sharpened it a little bit, and I increased the contrast a little bit. Already you can see with this zoom in, it's getting a little interesting over here with these. But still, you don't have quite enough representation for what's going on back here. So what I did moving on from here was I jumped onto an old student version of Photoshop CS6 that I had lying around. And I took this cutout and I moved it over to a new document, just that cutout, like a square like this, okay? And then I went back to the original, did the same thing, and I did a little more tweaking to this, and then I overlaid that original image on top of it with less opacity. And I did that a couple times for different light layers on the photograph, which basically allows for different properties in the image to become more pronounced. And with the layering, basically the goal there is to try to preserve the integrity of the original photograph as much as possible, while it's getting to really see what's in the background of these photos with as much clarity as we can capture. Now, it's not going to be perfect, obviously. I'm not a professional or anything, so there's probably a better technique for doing this, but just wanted to quickly touch on and explain how I got to the results I did today. So right here you can see what that looks like when you've uniformly edited the whole thing. All right, so immediately you'll notice there's a lot more contrast in here, a lot more saturation, a lot more sharpness, and a lot of the background shapes here, as you can see, start to pop out. So now when we start zooming back in over here, you can see already the shape has become a lot more interesting, right? A lot more interesting. So for those of you who are still struggling, I'll just quickly outline it, what we're looking at here today. Right here. And I will get very nice and close up on this guy and all his features here in a minute. There's probably already people who see exactly what I'm looking at. But I have gone over this in excessive detail. And I'll get into this object here in a minute, but it's kind of important to understand this one before we look at this one. So, okay. So what I did from here is I just did the same thing. I just did more contrasting, more sharpening, and tweaked some exposure settings to try and once again get those details to pop out, and then overlapped it again with the original image at like I think half opacity, something like that. And so this is the effect that has. And now if we could zoom in here a little bit, we can now really start to see some characteristics coming out here. First of all, I just want to point out this big iris now that is visible thanks to the higher contrast and sharpness I'll just once again start to highlight what we're looking at here. All right. And again, I'll get really nice up and close. I have one more version here to show you of this guy. Okay, so this is the basic shape we're looking at. Now if I just get really close up here, I'm going to start to point out some stuff. You see this little bump right here, right? This is actually the underside of his nostril, all right? This is an individual we're looking at here. So you can see this little bump right here that if you look at where the shadow goes here, you just follow it over. That's the underside of his nose there, which flows over into this side. And there's a very subtle difference here between this tan color here and the light refraction that you see here. If you just follow that, it goes and curves around nice and neat. And it flows right up here. Same on this side. Although you can't really see past this object, and we'll get to that in a second. But basically, you can see the same thing going on this side, where it flows up like this. And what this gives you is a basic outline of the bridge of his nose and where his nostrils are here. You see the nose here. Okay. Not the greatest drawing skills, of course, but this is just a basic sketch outline of what we're looking at. Okay. Now, in front of his face here, you've got these alder scrub. That's what this is. This stuff over on the side of his face is all alder scrub. Okay. So it's very refractive and bright, especially because this tree line is completely exposed. So what you got going on with this object is you see this little bit of green right here as it comes up over here. This is like a part of the scrub here, and you can see where that green is, and it just tapers off to this brown right here. And what that is a leaf essentially that's partially green on the end of it and browning towards the tip. So he's got a leaf there in front of his face. Okay. Now, what is around his face here is actually kind of interesting. This is actually what I like to call a stick window, and it's in this case it's made of white alder bark, so it's really bright and reflective. So that's what that is, and actually you can tell it's a stick window because back behind here, behind the brush, there's a big cavity back here that he's standing in. And you can tell that's the case because right here, you got some blue light shining through this canopy past the side of his head. Okay. So he's just got his face right up in this space here, filling it up so that he basically can remain concealed and camouflaged and have a very nice clear look at me. And he's locked focused on the camera. Okay. Now back to this object over here. I actually initially kind of thought this was a face, And I'll show you briefly why I thought that. Because you got like what looks like a cheekbone going on there and a big forehead that's showing. So it would be like seeing it from the side. And you have like what would look like a nose right here. Or like something resembling a nose. Obviously the mouth right there. But I wasn't settled on this as a face because there's obviously some things wrong with it. There's some things missing. So what I ended up doing is I called in a practicing physician that I know, and I asked him to take a look at this. And when I showed him this object here in relation to this one as a face, he said this looked more like a hand to him. Okay, and this is a person who doesn't have a creative bone in his body, all right? He spends his entire day looking at anatomy. So when his take is this looking more like a hand, especially in relation to this, I'm more inclined to adopt that perspective, but I'm obviously unsettled on it. So you guys are going to have to tell me a little bit about what you think when it comes to this. But I'll show you why the hand theoretically could be possible. So you'd have basically 4 fingers here. Okay, kind of in the process of grasping, and then a thumb right here, completing the 5-fingered hand. And speaking of hands, you can actually see something over here that kind of looks like his other hand. In fact, you can see what looks like a fingernail right here. Pair of them, just a little bit of his hand that's visible. Okay, now getting into the next one here, I just sharpened it a little more, turned up the contrast a little more, and messed with exposure a little more to try and cut down on all this light refraction. So this is the result. Now you can really start to see some of the features on his face, especially underneath here with his nasal trough, where there's that little bump there. And again, you can just follow it over, and this is the underside of his nose right here where the nasal trough meets. And you can see right here and here a little bit of light catching the edge of the nasal trough, and then it darkens right here in the middle where it's coming down to meet his upper lip there. Now this over here is just like a jowl, basically, where the shadow is very pronounced because of this stick that's in front of his face. Okay? Now you can really see his eyes. At least this one really well. This one's a little more difficult to see because you got a lot of light refraction going on. But there's just a hint of an iris right here as it goes and darkens towards the middle where his iris would be. Okay. And again, you can just trace the sides of this up and like that. Okay. And all this is doing is just showing you everything that's was originally in that image. Okay. Once again, just a really close look at his face. And there he is at a distance here. Now, I don't know what he's grasping for over here. If it's this alder sapling, and this is a sapling right here, this bright thing. I don't know what he's actually grasping at, but I'll be able to go back there and show you where he was. Okay. Now, moving on to the next slide here. we have a far more direct view of this structure. Okay, it's the same exact structure. You see the tree line over here on this side, and here's that hill actually on this side that goes down towards the creek. All right, so same exact scene. Now, this stick structure is actually really interesting, so I'm going to get into this real quick and talk about how it was suspended. The entire thing is being held up by tension, basically. You have, first of all, this stick right here, which is a free balancing stick right in the center. Okay. And then you have these two saplings here and here. And these are saplings, you can tell, because if you follow it up here, you can see there's branches coming off of it. You can also tell by how straight these are, because branches, when they grow, they like sort of bow up towards the sun, because of photosynthesis. That's the way they grow. So these are really straight. So that's how you can tell that's one way you can tell they're saplings, beside the branches coming off of them. But the way they're set up here is that they're actually resting on top of this log here, this big redwood, and then there's another stump over here, or not a stump, another log, which I'll show you in person, where these things are shoved underneath it. And actually, this one here on the top, this one, is now shoved underneath the end of another alder over here, and this stump is shoved between this stump and another tree. So it's all really wedged in there pretty well. So what that does is it provides right here a space, or a little shelf, to hold this up and that central balancing stick up. And then this stick actually is positioned on the front side of both of these saplings, which are rooted into the ground down here. So everything's it's balancing perfectly on all of this stuff. And the reason the way I found out how this was balanced was I actually messed with this central balancing stick, and the whole thing ultimately ended up falling flat on the ground like this, and it's now all locked together in the same fashion. It's just on the ground now. Okay, because I knocked it over. But yeah, it's very impressive structure. You can't really tell how big this is from this image, but I had to hold the camera about a foot over my head to get this thing in the center of the frame. Okay, and I'll show you this also, but I placed a Home Depot yardstick up against this thing, and I'd estimate about that is about a yard. Okay, just for reference. I'll throw that up near the end so you can see. But enough about the actual stick structure. Let's get into the rest of these anomalies, because there's quite a few more to discuss. Let's start with this one here. So this one's interesting. Let's get close up to him first. So I'll highlight him. Highlight all his features here. And he's just peeking back up over this old growth redwood stump. There's a huge stump right here. Okay, and there's a lot of scrub in front of his face, but we're gonna pick it apart. So for those of you who aren't cluing in just yet, this is actually a white Sasquatch, okay? Which I don't know how rare pictures of them are, but I know there's a precedence for them being taken, so this is not a first. Now, down here, past all this scrub, you'll be able to see by the time I'm done that he's got his teeth showing down here. And he's actually got a cavity in one of his teeth over here, which I'll show you. But he's got a lot of stuff breaking up his face. But right off the bat, you can tell this is a solid object because there's light catching the top of his dome right up here. And on his forehead, you can see a lot of these shadows from the sticks all over. And then there's a little space right up here where the light comes through, and I'll talk about that in a minute. There's actually several spaces where it comes through and comes across his forehead. Okay. We get into the next one here. You can see there's a huge difference in dilation between his eyes. All right, and I mean, you can still try to dismiss this as an illusion, and we'll talk about all that in a bit. But the reason why you have that difference in dilation is because you have like this scrub here in front of his face, and you have a lot that's shielding this part, and then you have a lot of light that is coming in from the canopy up here. And it's coming in at this angle because there's a clearing over here. And it's finding little gaps in these brush, and it's got a beam going right across his face, and it's partially striking him in the eye, which is why you can actually see that beam of light come across and hit this tree, and it's hitting stuff back here in the scene. But it's also hitting him right in this eye, which is why his eyes are so differently dilated, because they have a great sensitivity to that light. And real quick, you can actually see a little bit of his ear structure here. I know I highlighted this once already, but I'm going to highlight it one more time. You would see that little bit of an ear structure right here. Now, with his teeth, they're really hard to see through the scrub, but I'm going to show you a little bit here. So what you have going on here would be like an underside of his lip right there, his bottom lip. And then his top lip coming up like this. And then you have two teeth coming together right here. You have a hint of a tooth right there and right there. Now up here you have a tooth here. You have that cavity right here, right there. You have a hint of a tooth there and a hint of a tooth there. Okay. And then just a little bit of his bottom jaw over here that's showing through the scrub. Okay. And I'll get up there and I'll compare myself to what's in this image in a bit. Okay, there he is one more time over there. Alright, so now we have the next anomaly is also another white one. So this could be like a pair. I'm not sure. One hypothesis I have for these white guys is that, you know, how like a lot of First Nations elders, when they age, their hair turns silver and then gradually turns like snow white. I kind of wonder if with some of these individuals is if that's what's going on, because a lot of people report them looking like they're like graying in some cases, like they have a lot of like gray or white. So maybe as they age, their hair turns white. That's just a hypothesis real quick. But moving back to this one, I'll just quickly highlight it with a box. And this one was incredibly difficult to figure out, but I actually went back there and finally figured this out. Figured out how big this individual actually is and exactly where she's positioned, which I'll explain in a moment. Here what you have, I'll just zoom in, is a little bit of fluff that breaks up the texturing here versus what's going on here. It's just very subtle, but it's there. And you have like a very pronounced brow right here, which sweeps down into an eye socket. Now if you look close already, you can see this. There's a dark space here with a little band of light right here. And that's actually her iris catching a little bit of light. And you can see the shading right there with this eyelid going on really pretty well, actually. Okay. And you got part of her nose. There's too much going on over here on this side of the face to really see what's going on, but you'll really be able to see where her nose is by the time I'm done with this. And like part of her face, maybe. We'll see. Now over here you actually have an arm coming down over here, and she's putting a hand out on this this tree right here. It's like a redwood tree, a small one, which I'll get into as I go back there. Okay, then there's another redwood back here. It's relatively small, but you can't see past it in the frame because of these saplings, which are actually closer to the camera, which I'll touch on as well. But back here is a tree right back here that she's got part of her body behind. Okay. And what you got going down here is what looks like a little bit of female anatomy actually visible right here, as she's got herself kind of pitched at an angle, and I'll discuss it again when we get there. Then there's some kind of an object right here that is blocking out the majority of this part of her face, which I'll also touch on in the next version of this photo, but I just want to briefly do this part first. Okay, and now you have also down here visible just a little bit of her legs, like a knee bent right there. And she's got her legs slightly bent as if she's in the process of walking through here. Okay. Moving on to the next version here that's sharpened with the contrast and all that good stuff. You can now really see the difference, like where the floof is right here, as it breaks up right here. It's harder now to actually see this band for some reason but it's there. All right. And if we just go back here and zoom out, you can still see this object very well, actually. Real quick, the reason why you can't see the other part of her body here is because you have all of these different things here. Part of the stick structure itself. You have quite a few saplings between you and the camera. And then there's this big bowing type arch thing here that also blocks out a part of what we're seeing. Okay, so a lot of things layering on top in between this anomaly in the camera. And you'll see this exact perspective when we go back there, so it'll be pretty clear where everything is, hopefully by the time we're done. Okay. And you can tell it's not just like light refraction off of stuff, because you can see pretty clearly back here with these sword ferns, which, like where the individual fronds are, right? You can tell that it's green. You can tell that it's ferns, and you can tell that this over here is an alder stump, or log rather. So you can tell the difference between all these different things in the image, and then when you look at this, it's a completely different object. And you know it's solid because it's got light casting on it and shadow all different ways all over it. Okay, and you're going to be able to see when I go back here in the image that not only is this not here anymore, but you'll be able to see the size difference between me and what's back here. And this is actually enormous. So it's not a person either. Now, before I move on to the next one, the last one, I'm just going to point out a few things real quick because I know people are probably going to point at them. You have weird little illusions sometimes like this, and I'm almost certain this is just an illusion that's created by the sticks. But it kind of looks like something, like especially if you're zooming out and looking at it. Kind of just looks like sticks. It's a little darker than the rest of this stuff, but you can't really make too much of a determination based off of it. And then there's like this. Too far in the background. It could be almost anything, like a stump or whatever. It's too unclear. And there's something weird back here. I'm pretty sure this is just an illusion created by the scrub and the way that the light's reflecting off of it. There's a lot of arches back here. It's like someone is trying to establish a Mickey D's or something with all their arches. But there's actually a set of arches I'll touch on at the end of this video where it consists of 3 alder trees that are all bundled together, and they're all bent at this kind of an angle. There's actually at least two sets of them, which I have some film I can throw up at the end to show you. It's really unusual to look at. And yeah, you know, stuff can fall on these trees and make them bend like that sometimes, but it's really odd to see. So I'll let you be the judge at the end. But moving on to the last guy here. If we follow this sapling over here, and I believe this was an alder, you can see it goes all the way back here and leads us to whatever the hell this shape is back here. And I'll just highlight this guy real quick. And I'll tell you, I'm already hoping right now that he's an illusion, because he's got some wacky stuff going on with him. But I'll show you. I'll show you like the rest of them with all the different filters. Okay, this is like the most basic stuff we can make out from this. Just following where the shadows and highlights are is the way I'm doing this, if you're wondering. But getting into this next one, what I did was, once I got all the sharpness I wanted and the contrast and all that, I decided to actually desaturate this one, just so that I can look at just the shapes exclusively. And I have a saturated version, which I'll look at with you in a minute, but I just wanted to look at all the shapes themselves. Now immediately you'll notice there's like more striation lines going on here that are really pronounced, and that's just from the original pixelization, because of how far back in the shot it was. But already you can see he looks like he's closer to the camera than everything else behind him. Okay. Now if I just start to highlight him, you can see kind of here, and when I move on this will become more obvious. There's like some big muscle structure or something going on back here with this thing. At least that's what it appears to be. Now you also know this is solid because, again, you have light right here that is hitting what would appear to be a big shoulder right there. And then you have a lot going on up in this canopy that's like breaking up the light as it's coming in, and it's casting these shadows like this and like this, you know, highlighting some things and then darkening others. So you get a broken up idea of what's actually going on here. But it kind of looks like he's got some big ears or something going on up here. I'm not too sure what's going on with that. Okay. Now over here, this actually kind of looks like a hand, and I'll get back into that in the next version, because the colored version really gives us a little more to go off of as well. But if I just follow the highlights and the shadows, you actually start to see a picture of something that looks a little disturbing already. Like, I'm not sure how to take it, really. So let's look at that next saturated version. So there's actually behind him, there's a tree back behind him. Oops. There's a tree back behind him. Right here. And this is a big alder right here that you can just barely see from back behind him. And then there's a pair of redwood trees also, like some small ones back here, that I think he's actually in front of. And I'll try to get into the correct position to show you that when I go back into the scene. It's really difficult to tell how big this guy is, but I'll get into it. So with his with his hands. So basically what you have going on here is you can see that there's just a hint here of like similar coloration going on. And if you just follow where the light is touching, and it goes all the way down here actually. Initially I thought maybe this bright spot was a hand, but what I think that is, and this, is actually just some bark that's left on this alder sapling. So I don't think that's a hand. If anything, I think his hand and his entire arm comes all the way down here, and you can see the color consistency between whatever's going on here. And it comes all the way out here. This kind of looks like his other hand right here, honestly. I could be completely wrong, and maybe it's all an illusion, but an interesting illusion, right? So basically, if that's his hand, just to give you an idea of the scale, he could walk over to you and pick you up by the waist and walk away with you. That's how big this thing is. That's how big this guy is. Okay? He has to be enormous to stand over here and be towering over this stump like this, which I'll show you. You have to be stupidly tall to stand back there. And now if we just look at him from a distance in this picture, and the difference here in this one is actually what I did was I just increased the number of pixels in the image to 9,999.99 pixels per square inch. It's as many as I could put in here, just to see if I could get any extra details to pop out, so we could just really look at everything. So I'll just go over everything one more time. Okay. You can see that light right there. Now this object here, I didn't really get into that, but basically in the sharpness mode we were looking at before, you can see what looks like something maybe peeking right here. Again, I could be wrong. This is just me trying to make sense of what I'm looking at. But it kind of looks like it could even be a little infant, a little one that's right up against her bosom that's like peeking out at me, trying to get a look at the camera. And one other reason why I think that is because if you follow the light refraction on what would be the eye here, and you look at where the pupil is, she'd actually be at this angle. She'd be looking in this direction at whatever's going on right here. And if you're a thing out in the wild, if you're not looking at a potential threat or whatever, like if you're not paying attention to some other creature in your environment, your only other priority that's a higher priority than that would be your little one. Okay, so if she's not looking at me, if she's not looking at the camera like all the other ones, then what is she looking at? And my conclusion is perhaps that she's looking at a little one, potentially. Now again, with this guy over here, you can actually see him perfectly fine from a distance. In fact, right up here in this little dark area, you can see kind of what looks like those ears. And this might also be an illusion, but it kind of looks like there's some male anatomy going on right here. Could be wrong. You know, I can accept that I can be wrong. But, I mean, we can see what this looks like, for sure. And I'll take you back to that scene and look at it. And I'll show you that whatever is here is not here when I go back. So I haven't been able to reproduce this necessarily, but lighting conditions can change based on the time of the year. So you have to bear that in mind a little bit when you're dealing with photographs like this. But it's pretty blatant. Like, you can see it from all the way over here. If I zoom all the way out, it's still perfectly visible over there. Okay. So it's a little strange that guy's over there. Real quick, I'll go back and show you one more time as well that first reddish brown guy. Okay. I'll show you again where all these guys were located. Alright. So this stump right here is the same one, that corner that the white guy was peeking over. Except he would have been, that space is like somewhere over here behind that tree. Okay. So we got a kind of a wacky perspective going on here, but I'll touch on that. This exact perspective isn't repeatable today because of the fact that you have, like, up here a bunch of redwood branches have grown out and obstructed the view, but I can still go back there. I'll show you exactly where all this stuff's going on. Okay. This one you can actually see your nose a little better there. Okay. Alright, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a video where we really look at these characters with myself in the background in comparison, and I'll do side by side so we can really look at it. Okay. I'm just flipping back and forth here real quick just so you can see that whatever this is closer to the camera than everything else behind it. And he's standing in and amongst a lot of, like, branches and leaves. Believe it or not, what's down here in front of him are actually saplings. These are like little saplings, and this is like the brush that he's standing amongst. Okay, he's huge. We'll talk about how big he is, or maybe you'll see when I walk up next to this stump. You can really see that muscle, what looks like muscle structure right here, and like a huge shoulder with like huge neck muscles, like back behind him. I don't know if he's got teeth showing there or what's going on right there, but you really zoom in on him. There's like some wacky shit going on with this. But yeah, I think that's all we can really glean from just looking at the pictures. So I'll go ahead, I'll cut this here, and we'll move right on with the presentation into the next segment. Okay, so now that we have really picked those pictures apart, I've come back here to this scene today, and I'm going to do a comparison video of myself versus each of these anomalies. I'm going to try to debunk the one up here. As you can see, I've laid a piece of wood up here from this tree that's landed, and you can see that tree in one of the original images, which was taken in November of 2019. Okay, and you can see that kind of in the background of that shot. And I set this log up here, right there, just to see if we could reproduce an illusion, and it doesn't really look like it to me, but I'm going to really go up there and pick it apart, alright? I've used this sapling over here on the left-hand side of the frame to try to align this shot to the best of my ability. Okay, you can see that the log is still laying there on the ground on the left-hand side, and the tree in the background is barely visible around this sapling. Okay, so those are our markers that we're going to use. And I had to get a little creative to make that happen, so because it's on a bit of a hill over there. Now this is really jammed under here. I just want you to see this real quick. This is hardwood, all right? So even though this is rotten and the bugs have been eating it over the years, it's still heavy as crap. And this thing is just shoved underneath it and resting underneath this alder right here. So it's a lot of lifting, a lot of wedging just to make that happen. Kind of a little overcommitment if you're just doing a prank, which I don't think this is at this point, but I mean, feel free to disagree. So now I'm wearing all red. We can really see back in this scene myself compared to all these other anomalies and get a really good idea of the scale, right, that we're working with. And on this particular stump, you can see there's a little notch cut right here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but it's right here. Okay. You can use that to help you gauge the height on the side-by-side comparisons that I'm going to throw up on this video. I just want to touch on this log real quick. This is the one in the scene in the original where you're looking at that reddish-brown guy from a distance. You can kind of see this in the frame. So we know this was here, and we know it was leaning up there. So we have to consider the possibility that this created an illusion, which is why I set that up there like that, because that piece of wood was sitting up there, and I thought, well, maybe that caused it, but I don't know, it doesn't look like that from that side. Even if I just move it around a little bit, I don't know, it doesn't quite look right from down there, but I'll show you myself in size comparison wise. Okay. When this log came down, it actually impaled the top part of itself in the ground next to the garden, snapped off again, and then landed horizontally on the garden fence right here. And that's that log sitting down there. So it was a weird little interesting event that took place when this fell. But I don't know if it has anything to do with what was back here in the images. All right. Now we're gonna move on to the next anomaly over here. Before I do that though, I'm just gonna briefly point out where that one leaning sapling was in the image, and that one direct image where we can see this asterisk really well. And it's this sapling right here, this moss covered one. So we can confirm that that's the position of that. So as we go back here, this one was arguably the most difficult to reproduce because I didn't realize at first how far back in the scene this individual was. She's all the way in the heck back here. This is the only spot where you can still see the camera there through all these saplings, just like it was in the image. And this is actually the tree that was blocking part of her out. And I'll just demonstrate that for the camera over there. So I'll lean out from behind this. Okay. But she wasn't even leaning behind this. She was just putting one arm. She just had one arm kind of wrapped around the other side of this. And you can see most of her body on this side. Okay. Then she is just casually resting her other arm on this sapling right here. It's this sapling. I've looked at this image and all the other videos I've done for this so many times. I'm certain it's this one. It has to be. And I believe she was actually pushing this a little bit over because it looked like there was a wider space here. But just to give you an idea how big that would make her, I'm just gonna step back and then look at that. So part of her body, or her other arm, would have been concealed behind that tree. And then she would have been reaching out and grabbing that tree. Do you know how big you'd have to be to make that happen? I mean, honestly, that's humanly impossible to reproduce. Like, you can't even remotely get close to being able to pull that off physically, so kind of crazy there. Now, if you heard any weird noises during this video, it's probably this tree, this dead tree. Normally, it's not a good idea to be standing this close to a tree like this, because if it goes down, it's going to splinter all over the place. You can see it's completely rotted out. But I got to put myself right over there in front of the stump for the sake of the video, so I kind of have to accept a little bit of a risk standing here. Okay. But that, let's see, get the alder. There it is. The alder that's right there, almost center screen, that's the one where he was standing a little bit off to the right of it. That anomaly. So you understand how big this is, if I go back here, the camera won't be able to see me. Let's do it real quick. If I just go back here, and I were to stand back here, because it's downhill from this. If I stand here, just a little bit off to the left of that, and there's the corner of the stump. That's towering over me. That's like 10 feet up there, at least. And he was towering over that, which would make him at least another 5 to 6 feet tall. So you're looking at something that is between 3 and 5 meters, 10 to 16 feet. I mean, he's got to be over 10 if he's standing back there like that. And that seems really bonkers. But I'll tell you, there are trees in Alaska that are literally shoved upside down in the ground with their root balls sticking up. No industrial equipment was used to do it. There's no scarring on the trees, no indication on the site that any equipment was ever there. And most of these areas are inaccessible to such equipment anyways. So, and we're talking big boy trees, like big boy trees that are shoved in the ground like this, okay? Not little saplings, but full-size trees. You would have to be an enormously large, powerful individual to make that happen. That's just wild to consider, but true. There's physical evidence for that. Now, back here is one of their windows. You can see all the funny business going on back here with some of these logs, maybe? I don't know if you can. It probably just looks like sticks to you. But they do it that way on purpose. If you look right through here, you can see my cabin door, and you can see the back patio very easily. Like, you could remain concealed back here completely. Especially at night, you can't see anything over this corner. I often feel like I'm being watched from this corner, so it's kind of why I'm thinking they're still using it. Everybody knows what it's like to be watched and what that feeling is like. Now, this actually is sitting here. I don't know whether this was even here before. I've been back here so many times, and I don't even remember seeing this, but I believe this was actually a part of one of their, like, bundles that was back there of the alders. Like the end of there's a trident back here. Actually, right over here. Yeah. There. Here's a part of the bundle. Part of the bundle over here. There's the trident. So they used these same similar shapes a lot. So when you see those shapes, it kind of is a potential red flag. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're active here, but you look out for certain geometrical shapes like pyramids, tridents, the window shapes, anything kind of like that can give you a little bit of a clue. You know, but it's all meant to look really natural, and it can be totally dismissed as such very easily until you start noticing all the stuff adding up and all the weird activity. Or they do something really blatant, like that X structure, then it becomes real obvious. But, yeah. So if we just get here, like if the camera was looking up from this angle, over here, over the side of this stump, you line up right with this, up against this alder tree right there, which is right where they had that frame before. And they actually have one sort of right now, which I could probably show you a little bit. You see this triangle shape right here with the trident looking thing at the top? That's theirs. They put that there. In fact, this tree, this old looking one that's horizontal, it was on the other side of this alder when it fell down, and then they moved it to the other side, and they did something crazy over here where it was really obvious what they did. They went over here and they took this branch and they wrapped it around, and it attached right here, and then they wrapped it around this limb right here, and you could see this where it broke. It's now dry and brittle, but they wrapped that around there to anchor it. So it was really obvious what they did there. I don't know if maybe someone can tell me if that happens, where shit just randomly wraps itself around things multiple times. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I don't generally think that trees can wrap themselves around each other like that by themselves. And there's dent number 1. There's dent number 2. There's little birds in their birdhouse. So, I don't think I was able to reproduce an illusion up there on the top of the stump. That doesn't mean we can completely dismiss it, but I mean, it didn't look like an illusion to me. But, I don't know. You guys are gonna have to decide, because I'm not going to make up your own minds for you. This is something I've had an interaction with for the majority of my life, okay? Since I was like 12, alright? So it's normal to me, and to other people like me, it's completely normal to talk about this and experience it, okay? So, I know not everybody's gonna be on the same page with that, but you gotta understand, people come from all different walks of life, and they still go through this stuff, alright? A good example of that is how in every single one of these First Nations tribes, every one of these dialects from all over North America, just North America by itself, they all have names in their own languages for these beings, okay? They all have the same sort of descriptor behind them as well. And these names given to them by the native peoples describe their how they behave. So like the wood knocking, the mimicry that they do, they sound a lot like other animals sometimes, but not quite. There's a distinction in that their voices are often deeper and distinct when they're trying to mimic stuff. You can tell that they have more lung power behind it than what you'd normally hear from whatever animal it is they're trying to mimic. But they do all kinds of things to try to gaslight you basically into thinking that you're not experiencing what you're experiencing. That's what you gotta understand about these beings, is they're not apes, okay? They're not even, none of these native people ever described them as being an ape or any kind of animal. They hunted every other kind of animal, okay? They have skins, bones, trophies of all kinds, but they don't have that from Sasquatch or any of these beings, because they considered them a people, okay? Another tribe. And there's even instances where there's reports of them trading with these beings. Such relationships have all but collapsed from what I understand now, but some people claim to still have relationships with them. Just looking to see if we can see any illusions. I don't see any right now, but you have to bear in mind with the time of the year and the lighting conditions that could change. But anyways, next I'm going to show you a video of a Home Depot yardstick up against this thing. And then when I'm done with that, I'm going to roll another video that goes back in time to May 2020. And you're going to see what this thing looks like when it was still standing. It's pretty remarkable, pretty blatant. Alright, so I'll just go ahead and roll that video for you now. Hopefully I drove this home enough. And giving you a real idea of the scale difference, because it's significant back here. And it's deceiving. Alright. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and roll that for you right now. Standard Home Depot yardstick there for reference, so you can kind of tell how big this is and what we're looking at. Here it is. There's the stick structure asterisk. I may also struggle with camera angles today because I can't see what I'm capturing exactly, but I'll try to get a closer look at this stuff too for the sake of closely examining it. Seeing what might be going on. Also with stuff on the ground. This looks very well balanced, by the way. It's very interesting that this is here. Even it looks like it's been here for a long time, I can tell you that. And some of these sticks would take a considerable amount of effort to lift. I mean, sure, kids can do this, or overcommitted adults, but I just don't see the likelihood of it happening out here. People usually keep to themselves out here. There's not many kids, a lot of retirees. Most kids don't want to waste their time trying to cross the creek. The only children are actually the ones that live down there in that house, as far as I'm aware. So there aren't going to be many kids coming up here just to build this. Moving up the creek. I'll be moving along the side of it for a lot of it, but I know there's going to be a point where I have to cross and go into it. Speaking of cross, this is one of my own, a little present that I've been leaving behind to see if anything moves it. Don't mind my camera going sideways here for a minute. can also keep track of time pretty well with this because I can see how long I've been recording for. 7 minutes. Give me a good idea of how long it's going to take me to get back here next time. This tree came down recently this winter during a storm, and you can see it looks pretty fresh, and fell down that way into the yard, broke in half, and then fell that way on top of the garden, crushed part of it. There's an X right there, another asterisk/X. I'll need to start keeping track of what might be changing out here and what stays the same. Seems to be more smushed stuff up this way too. It's almost making it a lot easier to walk back up and through here because there is a predetermined path. So, continue to walk back to the sea where I can What I've shared with you here today is merely a single microcosm example of the reality which has been actively concealed from you by our so-called world authorities for over half a century. Authorities such as those residing within the government-sanctioned Smithsonian Institute, who are responsible for destroying evidence that you, the people, deserve to see. If my mission here has been successful and your curiosity's been piqued, I would highly recommend looking into the channels mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. The Facts by HowToHunt.com has been providing a safe, judgment-free place to share experiences for the past 5 years non-stop, giving a voice to the people like never before, while the late Scott Carpenter has left behind a legacy of truth, featuring countless photos just like the ones I've shared here today. For more extensive information pertaining to this topic, I would encourage those seeking out the truth to visit David Paulides' YouTube channel, The Can-Am Missing Project, where you'll find his intuitive Bigfoot 101 class, a free 20-part course covering the extensive history and research behind this worldwide phenomenon. Thank you for joining me today in pursuit of the truth, and have a great rest of your day.